Hey, welcome to the Bag Chatter Podcast. I'm Brian, not joined by Adam at the moment, but I will be in about 114 seconds, so hold tight. Our last episode of Season 2 is ready to go and is dropping in just a few days on Thursday, December 12th, 2024, so be on the lookout for that. It's a fun one. In the meantime, we have a bonus episode for you today, and it is a crazy one. It is from the Bag Chatter Deli, which is our Patreon, where listeners support the show for $5 a month and get a weekly episode of our bonus podcast called Cold Cuts Hot Takes. Usually we do Q&A on Cold Cuts, and we have a ton of fun doing it, but last week's episode was so different, we thought we'd share it here on the main feed as well. Also want to let you know that a new perk to joining the Patreon is that you get one free item from our merch store. Seriously. Head over to patreon.com/bagchattergolf and sign up, and within a week you'll get an email from me personally asking which hat or shirt or ball marker you want, no strings attached. If you leave the Patreon group right after you get your item, do we lose money? Yeah, we do. But we think you'll enjoy supporting us and getting the weekly pods, especially now that Bag Chatter will be off for a few months. So go for it. Take advantage of it. That is patreon.com/bagchattergolf. All right, that's enough of that. Here is last week's Cold Cuts episode 39, if you're scoring at home. Hope you enjoy.
It's Randy Butternubs. It's episode 39 of Cold Cuts Hot Takes. One away from 40, Brian. One away from 40. You haven't been one away from 40 in quite a while. You're well past 40. But we are one away from 40 episodes. How are you feeling, Brian?
I'm feeling one away past 40.
Okay.
I'm in my 30s. I feel like you look.
Wow.
Think that was a compliment?
Oh.
I'm not really.
No, it was not. It was definitely not a compliment.
I was thinking for this episode, maybe instead of jumping back into the Q&A format that we usually do, maybe we could tell a story, because I feel like we have a story worthy of telling.
We do. We had. Do you think there's anyone listening who's gone on a bigger adventure this year? I'm sure there is.
Yeah, I think there probably is, but I think for an off the wall, out of the box, unexpected adventure, I feel like this would be kind of tough to top.
It's a weird one because it was not a long adventure. It was a very short adventure. And so obviously people who are out there traveling the world, they're just gallivanting from country and continent to other continents, that's a bigger adventure, but this is unique. This is pretty unique. Yeah.
And it all started with a week of us not communicating, which
that was weird. Right? So to be clear, no turmoil between us. I want to get that off the books fast. There was no turmoil. I don't remember what led into that week. Was it Thanksgiving? Was it that? No. It was before. It was well before Thanksgiving. What am I talking about? I'm not. We're gonna edit that out too. So, I think we'd come back from our trip to North Carolina, and we'd talked a little bit. We'd kind of gotten some things recorded in advance, so some of the automatic things that would bring us into contact weren't there, but we usually Marco or text most days. Mm-hmm. And then there was just something happened where we didn't talk for 3 to 4 days. Mm-hmm. And then apparently I've now learned you made a decision to test me like God testing Abraham in the wilderness. And you said, I'm not texting Adam till he texts me.
Yeah. True story. I think it was about day 4 or 5. It's not really a kind thing to do. It's not a fair thing to do. It's not. This is not what a real friend does. And yet I thought to myself,
I wonder.
If I don't reach out to Adam, will he ever reach out to me again? Am I the one that's completely propping up this friendship? Does he not even like me? And he's just my friend out of pity. So
yeah, that's it.
There were a couple of times where I wanted to text you something funny or something interesting, and I was like, nope.
See,
I'm waiting.
I'm not offended that the thought crossed your mind. I'm offended that there was something you wanted to text, and we're like, no, I gotta stay true to myself on this one.
It was just such an interesting experiment that in the end turned out to be not interesting at all, because you reached out, I think maybe at day 7 or day 8, and you're just like, hey, what's going on? Haven't talked in a while, but just checking in. And
yeah, it's like, why haven't we talked this week?
And then I had to be like, well, because I was doing some psycho experiment.
I didn't reach out in those 3 days either, but at the same time. So yeah, I mean, that's probably the longest we've gone without talking in a year, at least.
Yeah. And it'll never happen again, Adam. It'll never happen again. But coming off that 8-day break, there was a flurry of texts, and I believe it was the following day you were like, I'm going to text you a couple things, and you left me a very long message on Marco Polo, which kind of sets the stage for the adventure.
Yeah. I don't know how much backdrop do we need to give this thing?
It's kind of your story, so
I'm going to give the very brief version of my history with this.
Okay.
I'm going to not give much detail. There was a man named Forrest Fenn who in 2010, I believe it was, buried a treasure worth a couple $1 million in the Rocky Mountains somewhere. And so this is pretty famous. It's been on, all late night television shows, Dateline type stuff. And there have been news stories run about this for a long time, and so I moved out to the Rocky Mountains in 2017, and I was living with my sister and her husband, and we became completely obsessed with trying to find Forrest Fenn's treasure. And by obsessed, a lot of people have gone through a phase of looking for Forrest Fenn's treasure. We went nuts, so there was a period when we were doing some form of research 15 or 20 hours a week easily. We were learning every word the man had ever said. I've watched every interview he ever gave. I've read every book he has ever referenced in another book or interview. We were going to the Denver Library and gaining access to their private section because there were some old maps of Colorado that we thought might help us and all this stuff. Okay, so we become nuts about this. And then in 2019, his treasure was found. Okay, so a man named Jack Stoof finds the treasure. I won't say it's under mysterious circumstances, but it gave a very anticlimactic end to this search because they never revealed. So the clues to this treasure were in a 24-line poem in Forrest Fenn's memoir. And so we'd been out there, boots on the ground, as they say, searching a couple of times, one time in a blizzard in the heart of Wyoming in the early hours of the morning, trying to beat the winter season because we thought we'd found something. And then Jack Stoof, about 5-6 months later, finds the treasure, and we don't know the exact location other than it was very close to where we were looking, which was... So it gave this anticlimactic end to it because nobody knows the classic, what did this clue mean? What did this clue mean? There's just millions of people who followed along with this and devoted years, decades in some cases, to trying to find this. And the answers were never really given. Some guy found it. And that's about it. Then
that's so frustrating because it feels like half of the treasure hunt is finding the treasure. The other half is discovering the solve, figuring out what all the clues meant.
Right. Everyone, anyone who's involved in this kind of thing, in this kind of treasure hunting world, is doing it for, as Forrest Fenn's book is titled, the thrill of the chase. That's the point of this, right? But you want, the thrill of the chase isn't there without the possibility of finding something, but you know that the odds are stacked against you, so you have to enjoy what you're doing, obviously. And so it was the only possible result that could have left anyone feeling like they had wasted their time, because so it was and I gotta tell you, like, so first of all, it gets found. We don't learn the meaning of the poem, where the treasure exactly was, all this stuff. Then, to add some mystery to this, Forrest Fenn, who wrote the book, dies mysteriously within the month. I mean, he was old, so it's not that mysterious, but suddenly. Then, like a week later, his wife also dies. And this is a guy who talked in his book about wanting to disappear, who talked about, he was fascinated with D.B. Cooper and stuff like that, where it was just like, he was the type of guy who it makes sense that he would end his treasure hunt and disappear to South America somewhere or something, But so a lot of dissatisfaction with how that incredibly popular treasure hunt went. And my sister and my brother-in-law and we had just bonded over this so much. And we genuinely, in the years since, we mourned it a little bit, because it was sort of like this thing we did together, and it felt so irreplaceable. It just felt like this was something that you couldn't recreate, and there was nothing else. You can't take that time and those skills you even learned, because we did a lot of stuff that was very interesting, and there was just no way to replicate it. And then my brother-in-law passed away very suddenly and in a very traumatic way. That's 2 years, a little over 2 years ago now. And to say for me personally that this is something that had this unfinished business sense, this feeling of, this is something I poured so much time into, then it disappeared. Then, one of my closest friends and brother-in-law disappeared in a sense, and it just felt like, okay, that whole world is just gone. It's just, there's just so much of what I spent those years doing doesn't exist anymore. And that was a very hard thing to deal with. It's not like it's not something I'm losing my mind over, but it's just this sort of always there dull pang that, 3-4 times a week, something would come up that would make me think of that time and the fun and adventure we had studying and searching for this treasure.
So how did that all change on November 12th?
So before November 12th, I heard about a book by a man named John Collins Black that was coming out, entitled "There's Treasure Inside." And I didn't know much about it other than that, hey, another treasure hunt sounds fun. And I immediately pre-ordered the book, texted my sister, said, hey, look, this is I said, what looks to be a Forrest Fenn knockoff, coming out kind of thing. And so I know nothing about it, but I'm excited to get it. I'm reading about it a little bit. This guy has hidden 5 treasures, 4 of them smaller, in the $100,000 to $200,000 value, and then one much bigger one that's in the $2 million type value. I don't know anything about these puzzles. I don't know, how to solve these. I don't know. He talked a little bit about what's in them, but that's about it. So I'm getting this going in blind. I get my book on November 12th, and I open up and I find the table of contents, and I look through and I see that the first of the 4 smaller boxes is called the Forest Fen box. And I immediately, like, my brain, I can't even tell you the feeling I had when I was like, wait a second. And I didn't know yet what this meant. Maybe it's just a slight homage to him. Maybe it's just using his name because he's a famous treasure hunt creator. So I abandon everything I thought I'd do with this book, and I just fly to this chapter, and I need to read about the Forest Fen treasure. And he is taken, so he wound up, most of Forest Fen's treasure was sold at auction, and John Collins Black wound up buying some very valuable portions of that treasure and re-hid them in this treasure, and then created his own 24-line poem in the exact cadence, stanza, and allusions of Forest Fen. And this was, even before I dove into it, one of the greatest things to ever happen to me. just that we could dive back into this. And yeah, so I'm doing this. Part of the reason over the last few days of our talking break that I didn't reach out to you is because I was obsessed with this.
Yeah. Makes sense now.
So, so then I'm reaching out to you. And so you tell me.
By the time you reached out to me about it, I think you had been obsessed and just pouring yourself into this for maybe almost a week at that point. And you pitched me like, hey, let me tell you why I think I may have solved not all, but a handful of the clues in this poem, and why I think there's a chance that I know not exactly, but I know the location of where it's hidden. And I say hidden, not buried, because John Collins Black said that, I believe he said that none of these treasures are further than 3 miles from a road. None of them are buried where you need a shovel. None of them
they are hidden. They're hidden, but not buried. You don't need a shovel for them.
Not going to be underwater.
Not going to be underwater, and not going to be in a dangerous place.
Not in a dangerous place. So you came up with a location based off of places that you've been before,
searching for Forest Fen's treasure,
that seemed to fit all the criteria. And in fact, there were a few specific elements of this poem that you found direct connections to for this location. And you prefaced the whole thing to me by saying, listen, confirmation bias is a real thing when you're treasure hunting, when you're trying to solve a riddle like this. And so you were like, there's a pretty good chance this is not it, but hear me out. What if this is it?
But there are some things that are hard to deny, Mm-hmm. There are some things that are hard to look at and say that is just a coincidence. I think my struggle in telling this story comes right now.
Yeah.
In that to tell this story effectively, I want to tell everyone basically what I told you. I have a PDF that you have access to. I want to read that PDF. That's what I want to. That lays out my solve for this treasure hunt.
And I think there will be a time for that. I don't think this is the time for that, but I think there will be.
Quite. But there are some things. But how do we talk about it then?
We don't have to talk about it. All we can just say is that we had a hunch that there was a chance that you had the right location, to the point where after I heard your 10-minute explanation on Marco Polo, after I looked at the PDF, after I looked at the pictures you sent, I believe my only response to you was, what are you doing next Sunday? Because it was enough for me to say, let's fly out west. Let's get in a car and let's drive a couple hours to this place where you think it might be. I've got the points, the airline points to do it. And we've got like a 36-hour window basically that I did, and I thought maybe you could too. And so I pitched that to you, and you were on board.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly what I wanted to do. I didn't think I didn't know, because I think this is pretty inherently a cool thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think there's no way to not find this interesting. At least it might not be your cup of tea. You might not spend dozens of hours poring over texts on this. You might not want to, fly thousands of miles for a day trip as we did. But I didn't know what your reaction would be. I knew you would be interested. You later asked me, you were like, were you working up to asking if I wanted to go? And I was like, not at all. I thought you would say, if I was telling you, because I knew that for me to do this, it would be 48 hours max and probably less. And I thought, and it would involve a lot of driving. And there was a flying and a driving aspect. And I know you don't love road trips like I do, and stuff like that, where like if I could have driven the whole way out there, I would have.
Yeah.
And so I just didn't think it was something. I thought you'd be interested in what I was doing, but I didn't think there was any chance you'd be like, let's do this together.
Yeah. In a weird way, even though I knew the chances of actually finding that treasure were pretty small, despite what we felt like was really good evidence, the thing that made me actually consider doing it is the fact that the treasure is worth like low six figures. If the treasure box would have just had a slip inside that said, "Congratulations, you found me."
Right.
Is it still an incredible adventure? Like, yes, but to me, it's just not a justifiable one because I don't have the emotional connection to it that you do.
Right.
So that promise of actual treasure was like, hey, when else am I going to get a chance? It's kind of like it's a lottery ticket that's like the most fun lottery ticket you've ever purchased. And I got to say, we booked the flights. We had to basically, from the moment we decided to do it, we had to wait a week till we could actually do it, so that it worked out with both our schedules.
I mean, for me, completely torturous. I'm plugged into like Discords and message boards about this, and I'm seeing some people saying some things at least in the vicinity of where I want to look. And I saw one guy saying he was going to an area fairly near where we were going, 2 days before we're about to fly out. And I'm just like having a panic attack that whole week, just waiting for time to pass.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. I probably didn't think about it quite as much as you did, but I got to say, we set an alarm for Sunday morning, November 24th around 3 a.m. And that, I don't know, 12 hours, whatever it was, between when I got up to when we arrived at the site, those were some of the most unique, fun hours of my life. I can't describe because it was such a high upside, and there was a little bit of risk. Like, we knew, hey, if we come up empty here, like, that's going to suck. But, but I knew we'd still have like the adventure portion of it. So it was a ton of fun to do it. Just completely something I would never ever have done before. Told a handful of people what I was up to that week. Yeah. And I think a couple people were like, wow, that's crazy, but crazy in a good way. Nobody was like, you're an idiot.
Right. And I think the more information people had, the less they would have thought we were idiots. If they knew what we were basing it off of, and that is going to be a little bit true on this podcast, potentially.
True.
But so without going into too much detail about the location, or for a bunch of reasons, we'll explain at the end, I guess. We flew out west. We landed, and drove what was 3 to 4 hours. And so now of note, I was just, when we were finally leaving, I was buzzed about this. Like, I was so ready to go. I swore I was going to try to go to sleep at like 9 p.m. because we were getting up at like 3 a.m. to leave. We met at just shy of 4 a.m. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to bed at like 10 and laid awake in bed for 4 hours before finally just ceding to the fact that I'm not going to be sleeping here. And got up, made myself some coffee, was like, I will sleep on the plane. I slept for 20 minutes on the plane. So I went on this trip. I believe it amounted to 39 straight hours without sleep. And so this whole thing that feels a little bit like a fever dream anyway.
Yeah.
There were moments when I felt like I was dreaming. But so we get out there, we take a beautiful drive.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just talking about it's amazing to think about, we were traveling for 12-ish hours to get to this location. Have you ever traveled somewhere where you more talked about one thing? This is essentially all we talk about. You and I like to, chat about stuff. Very little of that. Just it was largely this, I would say.
Even for the last couple hours of the drive, there was Sunday NFL football on, and we barely even remembered. I had to remind you to update your fantasy team.
Yeah, it's true. It's a weird thing. So we got to the location. Again, I think maybe we should spoil. We did not find it, and that's why we're being secretive still. Because should I? Maybe we could edit that out. Maybe I shouldn't spoil it. I think it's clear that we didn't find a truck.
Yeah, I think probably people get that.
But I want you but this was a convincing enough location in theory that I found to be much, much more convincing in person. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah. You and I talked about afterward that one of your biggest fears was getting there, and as soon as you walk on site being like, oh, nah, this does not have the right vibe. But it was the opposite, I think, for both of us. It was like, no, this kind of feels exactly like I thought it would, and it's got to be here somewhere.
Yeah, I was nervous about that because I have experience with Fenn's Treasure you do a lot of research on Google Earth, and then you try to find as many photos of a place as you can, and it's just impossible to get the scale of things. And sometimes you get there and the scale is way too large, and you're like, no, this isn't it. Sometimes it's not, it's too small, and you're like, nope, this also isn't it. It's not the type of place where you'd hide something. And this, upon arriving, I'd say the most confident I felt about our chances to find it were, and I mean in the whole time, in the research, in the trip, the most confident I was in the first 40 to 45 minutes of being there. Because when we started to see the landscape of this unbelievably beautiful place, I felt very strongly like, I think we're going to flip a rock here and it's going to be there.
Yeah, and because it's not buried, because it's only hidden, there's only so many ways to hide something in nature. We knew it was going to be in some thick brush or under a rock maybe, or maybe in a small little cavern created by a bunch of rocks that are just small enough that you can move them, but big enough that something can hide underneath. So
it was about 20 minutes in. I was looking in one place and you called me over and you said, I think there's something you should look at. And what you'd found was this area where there were a lot of rocks and all sort of movable. And when you lifted these rocks, it would create these, you use the word cavern, sort of these caverns into the ground, but with other rocks, the perfect size for the box we were looking for.
Mm-hmm.
For the 10 minutes we were looking through that, I felt like we're just looking for which rock it is.
Right. Yeah. Like
that's really what it felt like to me in that moment. And so we were boots on the ground at the location for 4 hours and 15 minutes.
Yeah, we got there right afternoon, and we knew we'd have between 4 and 5 hours. I do want to say before we go any further, too, some of you might be listening being like, what are you guys even talking about? Like, did you guys just get scammed? Like, is this a real thing? Like, this guy has been doing press tours. You can read stuff online. He was on Good Morning America. The book that Adam mentioned, There's Treasure Inside, has been in the top 25 on Amazon, I think now for over a week, maybe 2 weeks off and on. I don't even know if you can get it right now. It was a $45 book. It got discounted to $35 on Black Friday, and then it sold out as the press started rolling a little bit. So it's definitely legit. But yeah, we, like Adam said, we got there just afternoon. We had 4.5 hours to search, and an area that I would say is not like 100% defined by definitive boundaries, but sort of like, it's not
there
like
are
it was
some boundaries to where it feels like it could be. We searched the area that we so if we had to draw a map or a circle on a map around the area that we most thought it was, we searched that place very heavily. We then started thinking outside the box a bit and saying, okay, what if we're 90% right, but just off on what a couple of these final clues mean and what, so without giving anything away, it says, the poem says, there's a clear location, right? A landmark you're looking for. And then it says near here, the treasure lies, essentially. Yeah. And so we had to figure out exactly what near meant, what near here, near the landmark, near where you can see the landmark, near, those types of things. So we thought outside the box, spent some time. I think the problem now, if this isn't jumping ahead, so it's been a little over a week since we did this, and I'm not sure what, so I feel like we searched that location very heavily.
And yet there's a reason why we're being coy about where it is, because we walked away not 100% sure that it wasn't actually there.
Right. I think the location itself in person, so, in PDF form, very convincing.
Yeah.
In person with that information, it feels too unbelievable that it's a coincidence. And again, back to confirmation bias. That's the number one thing in treasure hunting. But the number of things that come together to create the confidence that we are alluding to it's strong. It's strong.
I told you on the plane, if this is not the location that we're headed to, if we laid all these things out to the author of the poem, I feel like he'd be like, "Oh, wow. Yeah. That is crazy," because all those things line up.
Yeah, and some of them could have, some of them are the types of clues that could have different types of meanings and maybe a little less concrete. Some of these clues, when you figure them out, are extremely concrete. They're kind of undeniably like, this makes sense and is the type of place that this guy would hide a treasure, that Forrest Fenn would have hidden a treasure, if you know anything about Forrest Fenn.
But at
And
the same
so,
time, you didn't have a concrete solve for every line of the poem. So his response could have been, well, what about line 7? What about line 12? And we would have been like, yeah, we're not totally sure about that.
yeah, I'd say that I felt like I had solved the end of the poem, and therefore, and that's not the way things worked with Fenn's, if that makes sense. You knew that, Fenn had said that you needed to solve the first 5, 6 puzzles within the poem, and then for the rest of them, you actually needed to be boots on the ground for them to even make sense. I don't know if that's true. I feel like it was maybe intended to be true, but just through copious amounts of research online that if people knew what I did to come up with this spot, it is something where I felt like I had found the resting place. And then so I was sort of back engineering the rest of the clues, and all of them, I think we have a plausible a plausible to good to great explanation for every clue. I do.
Yeah.
But at the same time, some of them were like, well, that could mean 4 things. I can come up with 3 that sound plausible. That's where the confirmation bias comes in, right? I can come up with 3 things that would make sense for this line. Some of them were like, no, I can think of about 1 thing that makes sense, and it applies here, And so we did not find it, despite exhaustive, cold, rainy, sleeting searching. And I feel I think we both talked a lot on the trip home. That was very shortly after we got stuck in a blizzard on the way home. Our
story.
Hotel plans got thrown off. We had to be flexible. We had to adjust.
We did,
to say the least. It was dangerous. That snowstorm was not a safe situation.
No,
it was a little scary in a couple ways. There was one point which we thought we literally might be stuck for a few days. It was not a fun feeling.
How do you feel about Thanksgiving? Just the 2 of us.
Just the 2 of us out here.
But going back to that 4.5 hours, one of the things we talked about before it was like, how is it going to feel if we have to leave that place not having found it? And it was like, I didn't really want to think about it, but I knew it was a very good possibility. And I thought it would probably feel really frustrating. And like, when do you call it off? Do you call it off a half an hour before it gets dark because you feel like you've checked every place twice? Are you still searching after dark because you're like, no, it has to be here? And all I can say is that 4 hours was probably like 4 of the most fun hours that I'll have this year, even though it was frustrating, even though about an hour in, like if there was a chart of my chances of thinking we would find it just plummeted, or I guess it wasn't one moment, but they just slowly kept plummeting. And then about an hour in, I realized like, oh, we're probably not finding it. It was still like so much fun. And by the end, I was sending videos to Erica, and it was raining on us and it was cold. And I was still like, this is so much fun.
The rain and the cold actually kind of made it feel more adventurous. We dressed appropriately. It felt like the most like memories I have of childhood play that I've done in a very long time, where it's like, I wish, we might have some videos and stuff that we could share where it's like, we were wading through incredibly dense, thick areas of brush and getting our hands dirty and flipping rocks and wading through rivers. I was out on a log at one point in the middle of a river, and I'm like, okay, like this is sort of like what childhood play was like, what you were pretending you were doing, and it was great. But we do feel like we searched the area very well. We did not find it. And that leaves us in a conundrum, because in some ways the worst case scenario is getting out there, loving the spot, being convinced that it might be there, not finding it. And now, so like if I still lived out that direction, I'd hop in the car and take a day trip and go again. Yeah. Right. But it's tough for us to go back to this location knowing that I don't even know necessarily where we would search right now because we've searched it pretty heavily. I will say that I don't think I said this to you, Jack Stoof, who found Fenn's treasure, I read this week, said that he was confident on the location and it took him 20 trips to the location to find it.
Huh.
So given the area that I vaguely know of Fenn's treasure, which we know it was in Wyoming. I have been boots on the ground in the wilderness of Wyoming looking for this treasure, and the sheer size of that, I can see that being larger, though he believed he had isolated it down pretty narrowly, obviously, and did because he found it. But I don't know. There's a chance that if we talked to a Jack Stoof, he'd say, no, I knew where it was, and it took me 20 trips.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that could be true in this location, but
I feel like when we left and started our drive back that Sunday evening, if we would have polled each other on what percentage of the chance that we are back here at some point looking for this, I feel like my number would have been a little higher than yours. And I don't know why. I don't know if that's it, and I feel like that's not typical of our personalities, but I don't know if it was just you being a little more realistic, like what would actually make us invest the time and money to come back out here. And we talked about it since, like maybe having a really powerful metal detector could have helped.
We did have a metal detector with us, but not a powerful one. It was a pinpointer, so you needed to be near it. And
even though we talked about how 4 hours felt like kind of just the right amount of time, because by the end of it, it was like we've been over every possible area, it seems, more than once. I do feel like if you were asking me what are the criteria for us to go out there again, one of them for me would be like, I want 2 days. I want to make sure that I would leave that spot completely confident that, literally no stone was left unturned.
Yeah.
Maybe being there in a different season would shed some different light literally on things.
Could make it harder, could make it easier. We don't know, but we wouldn't know till we got there.
Yeah. And one thing I don't, or maybe we did talk about this, but just how, we were there in November and things certainly aren't, plants and bushes and shrubs and trees aren't as alive as they are other times of the year. In one sense, I feel like we were there almost in the best time for that, though there were a ton of leaves on the ground. And he has said not to search in the snow because snow cover could impede you finding it. I don't know if that's true about leaf cover as well, but I don't know.
Here's what I'll say. I agree with you that I was taking a very, when my percentage was lower than you on the way back, I do think that was a lot of pragmatism rather than anything else, where I'm like, and I felt a little bit like, okay, I know you were 100% in, you knew exactly what you were doing. I had this solve, and I didn't drag you out there. You volunteered to go out there, but you used your airline points, and you paid a lot of the cost of, or all of the cost of us getting out there. And I felt a little bit at the time like, okay, like you can only have someone do that once.
Yeah.
You can only have the confidence in a location one time to be like, hey, will you fund this for a share of the treasure? Kind of thing. And what I will say, and so it was, and it's just like, nobody, you said earlier, nobody in your life said you guys are being idiots. No one in mine did either. I don't know what people would say if we were like, yep, we're going back, same location.
Yeah.
I agree on the 2 day thing. Like, actually spend nearly morning to night there for 2 days and just be like, okay, like you said, true grid search this place. Yeah. I mean, we did a lot of that. We did not formally grid search, but we did a good we did a good search, I will say.
Yeah, I would say I would want to go for 2 days knowing full well that if we didn't find it by lunch on the first day, I'd probably be like, what are we doing? Right. Like we've already we knew this. We've already been here, but
right. So what I will say that is not faded, and I don't know if this is confirmation bias or if this is meaningful in any way or if this is just completely meaningless. Mm-hmm. Given the time we spent there, given the clues, given what it was like when we were there, I can't actually get myself to picture the searching we were doing as just a vain search at a random location. Does that make sense? Where I'm like, so obviously there's a possibility that nothing is there, and therefore everything we talked about meant nothing.
Yeah.
And the feel when there and the final locations were so distinct that I'm more inclined to say that someone else has secretly found it already than that it was never there.
Yeah, no.
And I don't know what that means, if I'm just being stubborn, if I'm being arrogant in my solve, but overall, I can't, even in retrospect, have a moment where I'm like, no, that meant nothing, and that meant nothing, and that meant nothing, and the thing, and the thing you found in the confluence of all those things means nothing. I just can't do it. I can't do it, and it's making it hard. I picked up the book a couple days ago and tried to take a fresh look at it, and like, okay, what if I was starting over?
Yeah.
I needed to find a new location. And I quickly stopped. Because I was just like, no, I'm not going to find another solve like that.
Yeah.
And so the fact that we don't have the treasure means maybe I should. But it's tough. It's tough. I don't know what to do with it.
Yeah. I feel the same way that I did driving away from that site before the blizzard came, and then I feared for my life. I feel like there's a non-zero, bigger than non-zero chance. Because, I mean, the most expensive thing, even though I used points, was the flights. And it was because we booked flights 8 days out. Right. If you're booking flights a month before or a month and a half, I mean, they're still going to be,
it's going to be
expensive,
notable,
but it's different. And it was such a fun time, and maybe going back out a second time would take some of the magic and mystique out of it that I experienced on that first one. I don't know. You've done multiple treasure hunt excursions like this before, but it was fun. If we never do another thing with this treasure, whether it's that box or one of the other 4, it's going to be a very positive memory for me. Yeah, me too. Which is cool. No, so thank you for that. It was an
incredible trip, and it was. You said you gave the word mystique, and there is a lot of mystique. And like that will be as one other treasure hunt in particular was, but this one was different, even in a way, because of the confidence I had in the solve and doing it with you on such short notice. I love when you know something I'll feel nostalgia for that in the future for sure. Like when I think about it, man, remember when we did that? Can you believe we actually did that? And I think we'll need to, if we go out, we'd need to either have some further confirmations or some new strategies for searching.
Yeah, I mean, and JCB has talked about how he doesn't want these treasures to be out there forever. So I don't know. Maybe 6 months from now, he drops some hints or some clues that somehow are like, oh, you know what? If we would have been thinking that. Yeah. Or even just like, the mode of like, here's what you should be looking for. Something where it's like, oh, we didn't quite search that way. I don't know what that could be. It doesn't seem plausible right now, but potentially.
Yeah. I have thought more than I felt in the moment as we were pulling away. And then you talked about this a little bit. There were a couple areas of the site that seemed slightly less plausible, but that we did not search as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then, the nature of those rocks that we were looking in, right? There was an area I searched actually much less than you. I kind of went beyond, maybe, it was stretching the limits of near here. Near here it lies.
Yeah.
There was another area of rocks with just everywhere to hide something.
Yeah.
And so there is a part of me that, of course, is it likely that it's in one of those places? Not necessarily, but we didn't fully search those. I think it's the risk reward question of how are we going to feel if we go, listen, that was fun, great mystique, but we're not going to do this again. And then someone finds it in that location somewhere.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, that would suck. But the odds of that happening are low. And then we feel smart when someone finds it somewhere else.
Yeah. Another thing that we talked about a little bit, but I've felt a little bit more and more convicted of since we've been there is we've talked about like foot traffic and how certain areas of dislocation were prone to just a little bit of foot traffic and some really not at all. I feel like most of our search was in the higher foot traffic areas.
Yeah.
And again, when I say high traffic area, I mean relative to that site.
We saw like 4 people in 4 hours. So, but it was a cold day. So maybe in the summer there'd be many more people. And
so in terms of, I don't know what season he hid this treasure in. I don't know what the landscape looked like, and I don't know what the foot traffic was like. But maybe the near here, maybe we should have pushed that a little bit more, and maybe we should have spent more time in areas that were a little bit more secluded where, I feel like when he's hiding a 6-figure treasure, he probably is not by himself. He probably has a lookout or probably a little more forethought going into that than just like, let me get as far away from the foot traffic as possible. But it is funny how you just think about different locations.
There was, so that area that I said that I don't think you searched there at all, because I searched down, and it's kind of an end to this area down there. And
I know what you're talking about.
And that I searched through decently well, but not like we did in the other area.
Yeah.
And there's a part of me that wants to go look there more. Hey.
So if you're a listener, you've now listened to us ramble about this for 45 minutes. I don't know what you're thinking. You might be thinking we're crazy. You might be thinking this is a lot of fun. You might be just wishing that Adam would detail his solve. You can probably find the poem online. It's obviously printed in this $45 book. I'm sure it's online somewhere as well. You can read it. I don't want Adam to share it with you now. This is our secret, and I think it's a great solve. And I do feel like I hope it's us that finds the treasure, or, I hope it's us that finds the treasure, which I guess is me saying I'm open to going out there again. But if it's not, I hope somebody finds it. And I hope if your solve is wrong, I do think it'll be fun still to share it with people. I think it'd be fun to share it with the author, like I said, just so you could be like, holy crap, there's a lot of crazy coincidences there. Yeah.
And so, maybe privately, hey, are we going to release this on the main feed as well? Is that what we said? Is this a main feed release?
I think maybe in a couple of weeks after the deli gets it, we can put it out there. Yeah.
So, join the Patreon. Maybe it'll help. It's helped fund golf tournaments. It's helped fund just the time we spend putting into this. It's helped. We love doing these Cold Cuts podcasts, but maybe it'll help fund a treasure hunt, and then you get more of this content. If you want more of this content, join the Patreon.
And if you take a crack at the poem and solve, you have a different solve, or you have your own solve, let's talk.
I don't want to release it publicly. I am open to collaboration with people. If someone else is listening to this and has a solve, if you want to discuss some things privately, we'll consider that on a case-by-case basis.
Adam, thank you again for quite an adventure. And yeah, I agree with you. I don't think our search was in vain. I like to think there's more to this story. So
I believe that there is more, whether it's a treasure or not, there's more to this story in our future.
Hope you enjoyed the episode, and remember, after Thursday, Adam and I will be going away for a few months, except on Patreon, where you'll get 4 episodes a month of Cold Cuts Hot Takes on Fridays. To sign up for that, go to patreon.com/bagchattergolf. And if you want to go pick out which free item from the store you'd like, go to bagchattergolf.com and click the store link. Not sure when we'll come to our senses and get rid of that offer, but take advantage of it while it's around. And we'll see you in a couple days for the season finale of Bag Chatter.